last panel of the day, and one that I am extra excited about. And so just want to say welcome back and thank you for joining us for the last conversation with cell phone noise in the background for the Vanderbilt Be Fearless Summit. This podcast conversation, Gabby, sorry, you guys, this has been a long day. This is the last conversation, and podcasting is something that is so interesting to so many people. So I've got two very famous podcast hosts. I've got Lindsey from We Met at Acme, and Bobby, who I know from back when he had one of his initial podcasts in Boston. And he started a new one. And so I'm going to ask both of them to discuss their journey to being successful podcast hosts. So thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
I know, me too. And I guess I'm going to ask the questions and they're going to be for both of you. So I guess, Bobby, every time I ask you start first, and then Lindsey, you can kind of chime in afterwards. And
do ladies first. Ladies
all right,
first,
Lindsey, so you first, whichever one.
Give her the spotlight first.
I love it. Thanks, Bobby.
All right, Lindsey, tell me everything about We Met at Acme for people who don't know the podcast and how you started it.
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know the podcast, We Met at Acme is a podcast about millennial dating. I started it almost, could it be 4 years almost now? In 2017, which is crazy. And it is all about the trials and tribulations of dating as a millennial. And it's really fun. Every episode we talk to either a professional, a celebrity, a therapist, and we learn a lot together about dating.
And Bobby, how did you start It's the Bearded Man, which used to be Purpose in the Youth?
Yeah, I got to start listening to Lindsey's podcast. I got to start taking notes for the dating game. So I got into podcasting, long story short, in 2016, just had graduated college, didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, which I thought, like, going to college, you'll figure it out by the time you graduate. And so I pretty much started the podcast as like this medium to interview people that I was inspired by, that I saw living their like true, authentic lives. And so along the way, I did that podcast for 3.5 years. Kind of was getting a little burnt out / just like starting to lose faith in my own ability as a podcaster. So at the time, I was driving full time as an Uber driver. Ended up transitioning, started working for a company called Liquid IV, where I started managing their podcast media buying. And then due to COVID, I was just like itching to get back into the podcast game. So I came back with a new show called It's the Bearded Man podcast. And it's ultimately just trying to help people reach their inner potential. I feel very fortunate. I wake up every day. I know what I want to do. I have like this vision and I see like this manifestation of where I want to go with my life. But I still remember the younger version of myself who was so lost. And so I'm continuously making content that I think that 22-year-old version of myself needed, and hoping that it gives people the inspiration to live their most authentic life, but then help them become the best version of themselves.
Lindsey, when you started the podcast, both of you actually, it wasn't as much of a saturated market as it is now. Is there one piece of advice you would give to someone who wants to start a podcast and is just too scared they won't become successful?
Great question. I would say to have a strong opinion and not be afraid to share that opinion. I feel like there are so many people who just think, oh my God, my friends and I are so funny, we should start a podcast. But that's not really what a podcast is or what makes it successful. It's about bringing something new to the table that people are like, oh my God, I never thought about that, or I really disagree with that, but I'm intrigued.
Bobby, what do you?
Yeah, that's really good. I truthfully believe it's never too late to start. And I feel like it's two parts. One would be kind of understanding where you're going, because you have to understand, like, when you're entering the podcast space, you are committing to talking about this subject on a daily or weekly basis at minimum. So you got to think about the long term. Like, is this something you want to talk about all the time for the coming couple months, couple years? So that's the advice I give. But part to that, I would also challenge people, like, ignore the successes of other people. Let that be like inspiration. But the amount of doors that have opened for me doing this podcast, you'll never see on the analytics. You'll never see through my social media posts. You'll never truly understand how much just starting in of itself opened a million different doors for me. So I would also add like just trust that if you're doing it for the right reasons, a lot of other things are to come along the way that can't be measured, and you're ultimately going to be in a better position starting the podcast than you were if you hadn't started it for the right reasons.
That's so true. And I mean, that's kind of universal too for anyone that wants to start any type of company or idea. All you really have to do is start. That's always the hardest part. Lindsey, your show is on a network and Bobby, yours isn't. And so people who are not as familiar with podcasts, but see that some shows are kind of attached to networks and some aren't. Lindsey, walk us through that process. And then Bobby, on the other side, would love to hear your thoughts of, why you didn't sign with one or haven't yet, or if that's something that you would eventually want to do.
For me, I decided to sign with a network because I felt that it would be easier with ad sales and things like that, so that I could focus on the bread and butter for me, which is really just the podcast and the content that I put out. So for me, that it's worked, but it's totally different for everyone. I know people who have so much success on their podcast and don't have a network affiliation. So it's really just what works best for you and your life.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if I had a podcast network knocking at my door, I would entertain the conversation. I haven't, nothing's came across my lab just yet where it made sense. And so to me, it's just like keep focusing on building the project and creating the content, and eventually the right people are going to step in place. Because I choose, like Lindsey just said, like having a network in place allows her to focus on the bread and butter, which is the content. It's just, she's essentially able to wake up and, she probably has conversations with the network to make sure that, aligned on the upcoming sponsorships or whatever, but they handle all the back end. She doesn't need to focus on it. She's the talent, she's a creator. And so I think in the long play, longevity wise, it makes sense, like find a network or find a team that can handle other aspects of the business that you shouldn't be spending time on. Instead, just focus on the craft itself. So I think if you haven't had a network knocking on your door, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I just think you need to keep consistently making the content and hoping and trusting that at some point the right network is going to find you.
Lindsey, when you started We Met at Acme, that was a little bit before podcasts were so famous. So I'm curious, from both of your experiences being in the podcast industry a little bit longer than 2 months, do you think that had you started now versus a year or 2 years ago, that you would have had the same success, or is the market too saturated now?
I think that, like, it's like any business, the longer you put at it, like the better, it's like if you build it, they'll come. And I think for me, the reason that I found success is because I had existed early on, and it took a while for people to notice my podcast, but it was there and the content was there. And so they could go back, and a lot of people do this when listening to podcasts. They could go back and hear, old episodes and see, do I care about this person? Should I care about this person? And so for me, that was important, and like timing aligned, but I still think that you could be really successful as a new podcast as well.
Mm. Mm.
What do
You want to jump in on it? Yeah, you want to jump in on that? Yeah, of course. I just like so many thoughts are brewing through my mind. Yeah, so like if I had started now, I wouldn't have hesitated. I still would have started the damn thing, because if you truthfully believe in like wanting to do something, you shouldn't worry about, is it too late or is it not too late? The best time to start would have been yesterday. The second best time to start is now. I think I got very lucky that a lot of, I think 2018 was a big year for me. I got into this like groove of like this West LA entrepreneurs, founders. And I got lucky because a lot of these successful people that I was interviewing had never been on a podcast before. And so they're like, yeah, of course I want to do it. Now they're getting inbounded all the time about being on podcasts. So it goes both ways. It's like, looking back, I feel fortunate because I was in it early enough that nobody else was knocking on the door of the people that I wanted to interview and talk to. Now there's so many podcasts and different shows that want to interview maybe the same people, but even if I had the idea now, I truthfully believe I would have still found a way to start and do the thing, because I truthfully believed in what I wanted to create. So I don't think it really ever is too late to start if it's something somebody's really passionate about doing.
What about sourcing guests, how do you both go about that? And who inspires you both in your daily life? Lindsey, starting with you.
I am inspired all the time. I feel like every conversation I have with somebody, I'm thinking to myself, should they be a guest on my podcast? There's one person in particular that I had like idolized for many years. She's had a podcast since before podcasts existed. She was on a radio show. Her name is Emily Morse, and she hosts this podcast called Sex with Emily. And I'd always really wanted to have her on the podcast. So I would message her like periodically until she answered. Like I just never gave up for years and years. I think eventually like having the verified check made it go maybe up into her messages higher. But I think that just goes to show like you never give up. If you want someone really great on your podcast, you can slide into their DMs. Hopefully they'll see it. And other than that, sometimes people come to me. Sometimes I hear them on other podcasts. Sometimes I'm just, creeping on their Instagram and I think they're interesting. So I think all kinds of ways, but social media is an amazing way to source guests.
Yeah, that's been without a doubt the biggest way that I've figured out who my at the end of the day, it has just come down to just genuine interest. Because I'm not interested in somebody, the conversation is just going to run dry. But to me, it's just being very curious and always keeping an open mind. Very similar to what Lindsey just said. Like I was on a call 3 weeks ago, like an intro call with somebody. There was nothing about podcasting. And by the end of the call, it's just like, hey, by the way, like I do this podcast, just planting the seed if it makes sense. I think we should do a conversation. And then it ended up happening. I didn't go into that call though thinking that it was going to become a podcast guest. So to me, it's just constantly just observing the people that I meet, the people I come across on social media. And like she said, not hesitating to slide to the DM. If I would have stopped sliding into DMs, the amount of no's that I got, I would have given up on the project. But I just slide all day long. I send the cold emails. I wait weeks and then I follow up. And it's just to me about timing. A lot of guests, like I'm in conversations, and this guest that I have coming out on Monday, this podcast was 3 years in the making. Like just the timing never worked out. Super busy person, but I stayed at it. I stayed consistent. And so I think it's just constantly planting seeds with all different types of people and trying to get as many inbound leads as possible. So trusting that too, at some point you'll get that guest. So yeah, that's how it works.
My last question for you before we get into the Q&A is looking back at the evolution of both of your podcasts, is there one thing you would have done differently that you want someone to know before they go and start a podcast?
I would say going back to what I had said before, know your position, know your strong opinion and what that is, like identify that. And then I think it's really important to know how much you want to put into this, because people who think podcasts are just like, oh, this fun thing I'll do on the side, like that's not how something becomes successful. If you really want to do a podcast, like drop everything and focus on your podcast and how to make it the best, newest, most interesting thing out there.
Yeah, that's so true. People don't realize. They think you just hit record and it's like things just get published to the world. It's not how that works. I think, part of what I was saying earlier about like I had got quote unquote burnt out with the old podcast rebrand started. I think another part of the reason I wanted to start a new podcast was I wasn't as passionate about the branding as I was when I started it. And so I think my advice would be like, if you're going to start a podcast, think about a way to brand it where as your life changes, as you evolve, you think you still would, at this moment in time, you think you would still view that titling the same as you would, down the line. At the time, my show was called Purpose in the Youth. I was 22. To me, youth is still like, it can be argued so many different ways. What does the word youth actually mean? But as I got more comfortable within my own skin and my own personal branding, I was like, yeah, this is great, but I also like want to be known as something else. So my challenge would be just like think about a brand, titling, whatever, and try to imagine your future self. Would you actually still want to be known as that? That would be my challenge for anyone interested in starting a podcast.
Such great advice, you guys. I have some questions coming in that I see. So these are from Slack and YouTube. Someone said, do you have a favorite podcast that you live to listen to? Lindsey, would love to hear your thoughts first.
Sorry, I was muted. I have so many favorite podcasts. One that is interesting because it's not in the dating space. It's called Imagined Life, and it is a podcast that takes you through the life of a celebrity, let's say, or just like a historical person, as if you are them. Like, for example, you woke up and like your husband was knocking on your door and blah blah blah, and then at the end of the episode it tells you who you are. And so on along the way, like you're guessing, like you're like, am I, Oprah? Am I this person? Well, like here are some clues. And it's really fun. It totally takes me like out of my head and into this like different world. And I love listening to it.
That's cool.
That's great. Yeah, I listen to so many podcasts and it depends on the mood. It weirdly depends on like time of day. Like I've been a big fan of The Daily. That's something I started listening to regularly on like the last like 3 months. So that's like a news podcast. It's the first podcast I listen to every day, Monday through Friday in the morning. Big fan of Lewis Howes of the School of Greatness. He's the sole inspiration of why I got into podcasting. So I always like feel like I have to give him a call out. And then I'd say the last one that has been a recent favorite of mine is called Smartless. It's with Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, Sean Hayes. It's like 3 celebrities and they bring on incredible guests. And it's just like super comedic, but also super storytelling. And so I found that podcast to be really enjoyable to listen to.
I love that neither of you said Joe Rogan because nothing against him, but that's
it's too easy. It's an easy out. He's
There's
great,
so
but
many other ones.
Yeah, he's an easy out. Everyone says Joe Rogan, so I try not to bring him up every time.
No, all right. We have time I have 4 questions, but we only have time for about 2 left. So this one is from YouTube. Do you ever hit a creative rut and how do you get out of it?
For me, I do. I feel like I'm so hard on myself when it comes to my episodes. And I will end up just like tossing an episode in the trash if I don't feel like it's good enough. And then just getting into this cycle of like, I don't feel like anything I have backlogged is interesting and blah, blah, blah. But for me, often, like, just like, it's really how I talk to myself. And then, going into a recording with an open mind, like ready to just like hear what my guest has to say and really listening actively, like I end up just coming up with this really interesting conversation with them instead of being like in my head about what we're talking about. So that helps. And then also just like getting out of the apartment, going on walks, like doing things, switching up my routine in some way or another, or trying something new.
Yeah, that's good. That's even something I've been trying to do better with guests is like just actively listening and stop worrying about like all these questions and thoughts that I had before the podcast even started. I think, and I was just talking to somebody yesterday about this, I think the greatest thing that I have found that allows me to not have creative block as much as I probably did a couple of years ago when I was first getting started is creating space from myself in the creative work. And so by that, I mean, like I weirdly have like certain days of the week and times of day when I record solo pods or when I do guest pods. And so anything outside of those hours is other things that I'm prioritizing. But more specifically on the weekends, I try not to think about it as much. I try to just like have fun, live an interesting life, new experiences, like fun times with friends. And then by the time Monday comes, I'm like so inspired to get back into the work. Also my body's like needs recovery from all the shenanigans, but I'm more inspired to like actually do the work. So I think creating space and hopefully sometimes like for some people it might be finding those days of the week that work best for them to actually create and do the work.
All right, last question says, what is the first stepping stone of turning your podcast into a business?
I would say the first stepping stone is finding, especially if you're doing it on your own, finding brands that align with what you're talking about. So let's say your podcast is about, how to build picture frames, I don't know, I'm just like looking around the room, then maybe you partner with like FrameBridge, who is a company that like DIYs your photos. And being proactive and reaching out and saying like, hey, I have this podcast, telling them the statistics. There are 4,000 people who listen each week. They're all really interested in framing. Like, I feel like it's a great idea to, maybe you start with, maybe you can gift me a free frame and I'll have it in the back of my recordings. And then, if people are interested, we'll come up with a discount code. And then if people are interested in that, you can like formally pay me for an ad spot, and then so on and so forth. So just being like proactive and making sure that whatever you're promoting is actually aligned with your brand, because the worst thing that you can, at least I hear on podcasts, is like a podcast about like, I don't know, seeing ghosts, and then it's like an ad about like your period, and I'm just like, what does this have to do with the other,
So essentially just the proper pitch.
Yeah.
And Bobby, what do you think?
Yeah, so brand alignment is definitely the key. I've had conversations with trying to figure out what aligns for like, it's the Bearded Man podcast. So it's like, I need to find like a beard oil company. I need to find a couple other ideas, and I'm in the process of trying to figure that out right now, because I've never truly monetized it just yet, but trying to think about what brands make the most sense. But I think before you even start emailing people and start thinking about what brand or who needs to be on the podcast, I think the first step is you actually need to start treating yourself like you already the top level business. From the jump, I've tried to treat every single podcast like as if I am Joe Rogan or the top tier podcaster, because I want the experience for the guest. I want the experience for the listener to be high level. Like, I don't want it to be a waste of somebody's time. So I think the first step is really truly believe in yourself and what you create, and treating it like you're already that $100 million business. And once you feel confident in that, people are going to see that in the way you communicated via email to the different brands, see your different pitches. Because if you get on a call with a brand and you're not even fully confident about the show you're producing, they're going to hear it and they're not going to want to do it. And I've seen it as an ad buyer for a company. So I've kind of been sitting in the background, like taking notes of like, oh, this is the right way to do it and this is the wrong way to do it. Ultimately, I think Lindsey said some great things, but before that, treat yourself like you're already there, that you are already a full running business, because people are going to see it in the way you communicate with them.
Yeah, you guys are so right. And you're both incredible brands and have great products that you sell. That is the podcast. So that is so cool. Thank you guys so much for joining me on a Saturday. Where can everyone find you on social media and each of your podcasts if they want to hear more?
Thanks, Alexa. This has been awesome. You can find me anywhere you listen to podcasts. We Met at Acme. And you can follow me on Instagram at We Met at Acme, or my personal Linds, LINDZMETZ.
Yeah, Alexa, thank you for doing this today. This has been great. For the podcast, you can find me on all podcast platforms. It's the Bearded Man podcast. Very simple. And then you can just find me on Instagram. Best way is at Bobe. It's really aggressive in the amount of letters that I have. It's BO, 3 B's, 4 A's, and a Y, Bobe on IG. And I would love if anyone DMs me and you saw this, let me know what your biggest takeaway was from the conversation.
Well, thank you guys so much for being a part today and sharing your wisdom. I seriously appreciate the time and constantly so inspired by both of you. So have an amazing rest of your weekend, and stay tuned, everyone watching, to see who won the $500 grant. In the next 10 minutes, we will announce it. right, this is a little last minute, but Brianna did not show up or couldn't, her laptop did not work. So I have about 4 questions for her in 6 minutes, and I am going to ask them to her. But Brianna, for the people who don't know who you are and your platform, give us like a brief 30-second overview.
Okay, yes. So I'm Brianna. I'm also known as Brianna Chicken Fry. I would say I started off on TikTok, and that's where I've done most of my videos. Now I work for Barstool Sports. I have 3 podcasts, and I'm dipping into YouTube. So that's kind of what I'm all about.
That is so cool. And one of the questions that I have for you that a lot of people asked is, how did you get the show with Barstool? Because there's so many people who have podcasts, and it's such a saturated market, but they aren't all on networks.
Yeah, it was really like the most unconventional way to get a job or get a show. I got talked to from Barstool by one of my TikTok videos, which was me like being hungover. I was just like being myself, kind of being an idiot. And they found that video, checked out my content, and really just liked my vibe. And then I got a DM from them. It kind of went from there. I was like the fastest internship in history at Barstool. It was a week long. Then they hired me full time. And that's when I started my show.
That is so cool. Audience members have said that they feel you're changing the culture of Barstool as a young Gen Z woman. Do you agree or disagree?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think there's a stigma around Barstool, especially with girls and on TikTok, like the whole misogynistic thing. And I think the only way to change someone's mind about that, or the only way to actually change a company, is to like infiltrate it with women like me or other girls. Like I work with such amazing girls. The CEO is a woman, and I think Barstool has changed so much in the past 3 or 4 years.
And it's kind of cool because everyone it's a household name and you think it's sports, but it's not. I mean, there's so many podcasts there that are culture based. Yeah. And pop show based. For someone who's looking to start a TikTok or get into a podcast, do you have one piece of advice that someone should know before they start to be successful?
Yes, I think when I first started, I tried too hard, tried to like have this personality, tried to be someone I wasn't, and it comes off very obvious if you're not being authentic. I think if you just go into it being true to yourself, say actually whatever you want, and just be unapologetically yourself, people can feel that and people gravitate towards that. And it's so much easier to enjoy content when you can actually feel like there's a real person on the other side of the screen or the mic or something like that.
Yeah, one of the panels that we did earlier was another girl from TikTok who has like millions of followers, and she said how she has struggled with trying to deal with people having this expectation for her. They want her to be a certain way, but she isn't always that way. Do you ever feel like there's moments where people expect something from you or they want something from you when they follow you, but you aren't necessarily always on, or you're not necessarily always on your phone?
Yeah, I think the scariest part about getting this platform and having followers and eyes on me is the expectation that people have when they meet me, or like when they see me out on the streets in New York. Like they come up to me and I get so nervous that there's such an expectation for me to be exactly who I am online. But people kind of forget, like TikTok is 10 seconds of your day. It's like a clip of who you are. It's not completely who you are. And it's very scary to have such high expectations. You think that it's hard to like form real relationships with people.
So how do you balance it? How do you stay down to earth and grounded when you have this amount of success?
I think the most important part for me is being close with my friends from day one. I'm really honestly bad at making new friends. I get scared. I have social anxiety. So for me, the only thing that keeps me grounded and like a normal person is hanging out with the people that've been there before I had followers. And just like, I think I have a very good gut intuition on if someone's going to be shady or if they're going to have the right intentions when meeting me, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. Had you started now, like say that you started a TikTok this week, like so many people do, versus had a little bit of time to almost build this platform, do you think you would have had the same success, or do you think now the market is too saturated, especially with podcasts, to start a podcast and get so famous?
That is a really good question. I think when I started, it was a totally different world, and it was way easier to like have that one video blow up because there weren't a lot of creators on TikTok. I think now it is so much harder. You have to get lucky. You have to hit the algorithm. But I mean, there's probably 1 million people on TikTok with over 1 million followers, you know? So it's like, there's so many creators now. It's kind of scary. And it's like, am I going to make it? Am I going to stay on this level? It's hard.
Does that bring you any sort of anxiety behind the scenes? I mean, obviously, and especially being signed with a network, you're on a totally different level. But did you have moments throughout this entire journey where you just, or even still today, I don't know, think like, how long can this last? Or, well, what's after TikTok? What's the next platform out there?
Yeah, daily, because I dropped out of college to do this. And I'm always wondering, is this the right decision? Like, I know it's going well now, but how long can something like this last? And I think I always have to tell myself, if you don't believe in yourself, then obviously it's not going to last. So if you're doing everything you can to stay relevant, to actually put out good content, I think that's the only thing that matters, and people will continue to watch. But if I move to LA, then I think I would be washed out.
I don't think so. No, LA needs more people from the East. Where are you from? Boston, right?
Yeah, I'm from Boston. I live in New York City now, though.
Yeah, I'm from Connecticut, but I was in LA for 4 years, and I left because I just got so sick of it. But they need more people like you. Brianna, my last question for you is, on social media, who inspires you? Who would you say that if someone right now wants to follow someone else besides you, that's authentic and real, who should they be following?
Yeah, this question, and I talk about this a lot in my podcast, I have stopped really looking up to other influencers just because of all this cancel culture. And there's one that has stayed true, and that's Bretman Rock. I look up to him. He's like my biggest like influence on social media. I think he's an amazing person. And if you want to be anyone on social media, you should want to be like Bretman Rock.
No, that's such a good person too. And I think that especially in that 20 to 25 age demographic, I mean, there are so many people out there putting out content. It's like, how do you know who is authentic? So how do you know? I mean, how do you find your authentic voice on social media?
I think what helps me a lot, and people get to actually know me and hear me, is podcasts. I think if you listen to someone's podcast and it's not like a video, like you're sitting down and you're actually understanding who the person is, and you hear real stories, you can hear their actual tone, their opinions on things. I think podcasts are the most important part of getting to know a creator.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's such an easy way to know if someone's authentic, or even taking away what someone looks like and just hearing his voice. Yeah, it's way more relatable. But no, thank you so much I wish I had more time with you, but we'll have you back.
No, I'm so sorry.
Totally good. Where can everyone find you on social media, and more importantly, TikTok, if they aren't already following you?
Yes, you can find me on TikTok at Brianna Chicken Fries, same thing on YouTube, and then Brianna LaPaglia on Instagram. My podcast, Plan Brianna Cut, BFFs, and Because We Got High.
That's so many shows. It's like so impressive.
It's a lot.
I don't even know how you sleep. But no, seriously, thank you so much. Everyone who is watching this, in the next 10 minutes, which is our last segment of the day, we will be announcing who won the Care Bears $500 grant. Brianna, thank you so much for stopping by. And we will be back in the next 2 minutes. Thanks, guys.